Many people see reason as a matter of cold logic and analytics, and praise instead the so-called irrational. Now, while any simple dichotomy between cold head and warm heart is undercut by our integrated model of emotion and reason, nevertheless, spiritual naturalism is not necessarily at odds with the view that seeks out the so-called irrational. Let's take a look at this aspect of spiritual naturalism now. The problem is summed up eloquently by B.T. Strain when he says, "The world is boundless and luminous in all of its dimensions and ever-changing forms. Time itself laid out like an eternal tapestry. To say it is beautiful or interesting is a comical understatement. In short, there's more to life than words can say or reason can comprehend. In fact, B.T. Strain has described technical descriptions of reality, that is, the kind that we get from science, as the ghetto of the English language. Truth be told, mythic language often does a better job of conveying the depth and the richness of the experience of life. Now, if this is irrational, as some might say, well, at least it does have some merit. Art, poetry, music, even sex. A romantic critique that eschews cold analytics in favor of the passion of life might embrace these things as irrational, quote-unquote. Personally, I would rather say they bear instrumental rationality, but in any case, there is clearly something profoundly worthwhile to be discovered here beyond purely logical analytics. But these examples are not very controversial. The more controversial examples are myth, ritual, altered states of consciousness, and so-called mystical experiences. But despite being controversial, I would suggest these too can be enriching. When it comes to these experiences, I say, dive deep, letting naturalism be your lifeguard. What do I mean by that? Well, first, dive deep. Explore beyond what's already known. All experiences are real. They're real as experiences. Say you're exploring a myth about Poseidon, the god of the oceans, and you have an emotional experience with this mythic figure. That experience is real. It doesn't mean that Poseidon really exists, but the experience in response to the image of him is valid and real, and you can explore that. This is a crucial distinction, the difference between our experience of reality and the actual metaphysical claims made about reality. This distinction makes possible exploring all these traditionally religious practices which can be powerful for enriching our lives. Now, the second part of this is let naturalism be your lifeguard. What I mean by that is, whenever you feel tempted to actually believe those metaphysical claims about reality, that's the point at which it's good to pull back and examine evidence. And when I say that, I really do mean examine evidence, because naturalism can always be wrong, and it's entirely possible that some other view could turn out to be correct. But that is a question for evidence. So, dive deep, letting naturalism be your lifeguard. Whether it be meditation, ritual, drumming, trance, trust naturalism to keep you grounded, and then see what you can discover. Now note that these activities are not meant to merely add a certain flavor to life. They're not entertainment. They're not spice. They're not just for fun. They actually reveal something different, something more about our experience. And this can be seen in particular with the exploration of myth. Michael Dowd distinguishes between day language and night language. Day language is the dry, objective description typical of scientific and technical language, whereas night language is the richly symbolic, interpretive, and evocative speech typical of myth. And you can use either to describe the same event or thing, but they do not convey the same information. Rather, they provide essentially different ways to relate. Now, to see this, let's use an example of a common existential crisis well encapsulated by the words of physicist Steven Weinberg. He says, "The more the universe seems comprehensible, the more it also seems pointless." So this seems to be some sort of disappointment in the universe. Actually, that's not what he meant, as he made clear in a later book, but many people take it this way, so let's just run with it. How can we relate differently to this crisis of apparent pointlessness in the universe through day language and night language. In day language, we might analyze the problem objectively and thereby formulate a helpful way to approach the crisis. For example, we might say that, well, perhaps on some level we all desire social approval for the way we live our lives, and in this case we're trying to get that approval from the universe itself by seeking a point or a purpose for our lives. But since the universe is not an intentional being and therefore can't provide any such purpose, what we feel is a sense of despair and resentment as a result. And a day language approach might suggest looking instead at our own contribution within the interconnected web of cause and effect, the influence that we have on other people around us and the environment and so on, and find our significance there. But what about night language? In night language, we can think of this problem of pointlessness in terms of a dark night of the soul. Just that phrase alone, the words hit you in a different way. You relate to the problem in a fundamentally different way. Possible night language approaches to the crisis can be drawn from different traditions. First, a Hindu might say, as we saw in the story of Arjuna and Krishna, that all aspects of the universe are part of the cosmic consciousness, and so they are meaningful within that view of the cosmos. Now, this mythic approach is not very naturalistic if taken literally, but on the level of metaphor, it may resonate with you and thereby provide a sense of meaning. Another approach might be to join Gaians in considering the planet Earth as a living organism called Gaia, finding that we are each organs in the body of a living planet. In other words, our lives have meaning within the self-regulating organism that is the planet Earth. Finally, naturalists might agree with Carl Sagan when he says we are star stuff contemplating the stars. Each of these approaches helps us to grasp somehow in a deeply subjective way that our lives are meaningful. So day language and night language offer fundamentally different ways of relating, and both can be powerful for achieving happiness in our lives. Now, we should not leave the topic of myth without addressing the issue of ethical use of myth. Myths and practices, traditional ones at least, always come from a source culture, and that culture may still be around today. Consequently, it's important to consider how our use of those myths and practices may impact the source culture. I'm talking about the thorny issue of cultural appropriation. So first, there's the issue of contested meanings. When it comes to myth, it's very easy to read our own naturalistic meanings into them and think that that is what they always meant, as if the creators of them were really proto-scientists who chose to speak in metaphor for some reason. And at that point, what we have done is we have appropriated the myth to ourselves in a way that is not only probably historically inaccurate, but also disrespectful to the source culture. Stories are potential sources of multiple meanings, contested meanings. But if we purport to have the real meaning, the authentic meaning, the original meaning, we commit cultural appropriation. Second, there's the issue of public image, which we can consider with the example of sweat lodges, a vision-inducing practice coming from several different Native American tribes, which has become popular among many white spiritualists. Now, if used casually and in public, the general populace may come to associate this practice with casual spirituality, and that would be much to the detriment of the public image of Native Americans for whom it is sacred. We have to think about these sorts of issues. Now, the issue of what to do about them is a thorny one, and I'm not going to attempt to resolve it here, but at the very least, though, we should each consider these issues, being aware of the multiple contested meanings of myth and the potential harm that can be done to the public image of a people. Bearing these concerns in mind, we can be responsible in our use of such myths and practices in naturalism. To sum up, what some may call the irrational, including poetry, myth, ritual, and more, can find a place within a life lived rationally. These things offer access to a different facet of experience in this naturalistic universe, and we can dive deep with naturalism as our lifeguard to explore how they may enrich our lives, doing so in a manner that is respectful of source cultures. So, as D.T. Strain says, To say that this world is beautiful or interesting is a comical understatement. There are states of mind in which the veil of that filter is lifted, and we can catch glimpses of the world.